So as you can see here, I have both of my MWS. They have had a couple of changes done since I made the first videos on each one of these, and I have had several questions regarding both the Archwick trigger system as well as the Ghetto Blaster in general. So I figured because I have made some changes and because I have learned some new stuff about them, I would go ahead and give you guys an update on what that is and hopefully answer any questions that people have asked in the comments of those videos or have asked me in person or on Discord pertaining to these particular builds and the parts that are inside of them. So before I start getting into all the juicy bits inside the trigger boxes and the hop units and all that stuff, I just wanted to mention this real quick. In the Ghetto Blaster video, I had talked about this Wolfman suppressor and how it had an extension piece that's floating around my room somewhere that you could use to put in a tracer unit. And the first time I went out to play with it, this piece actually fell out. And I realized, so this used to be longer. It used to be about this long, roughly, about almost twice as long. But I realized that I could cut this down and these two metal plates go inside here, right? So I was able to cut this down and I can drop, oh, I guess one of them is bigger than the other one. So one metal plate goes down and then this piece goes in here after I cut it down. And there's plenty of space in there for a brighter R or a brighter C. So this is the extension piece that I was talking about. If you do this mod to your Wolfman suppressor, you can get rid of this piece and you won't have to extend your gun any more than it already is with the suppressor. Now this hole, the diameter of this is bigger than the diameter of a brighter R. This is what this is, but with a little bit of electrical tape, you can shim it. It drops right in. It's centered so your BBs won't hit it. And then you can place the cap on top and screw it back up. And now you can use your suppressor like that, again, without having to make it any longer and still have tracer functionality. I'm going to start here with the Ghetto Blaster just because this one I don't need to take apart in order to show what I want to talk about with it. But the trigger box is completely untouched. Everything that is inside of that trigger box is exactly as it was in the initial video that I made about it. Nothing's changed there. Cosmetic changes that I've made, obviously you'll notice the selectors are different. These are not crooked. These are 60-120 selectors. So that's full auto, that's semi, that's safe. These are intended to be like that. They're not crooked. I do at some point intend to get another set of these with the 90-180 core. Whether I can find it in gray or not is irrelevant because I now have these gray pieces, but I'll pick up another set of 90-180s and swap that out so that I can have proper 90-180 selectors, just because I don't really like this, but I really wanted these gray selectors, which is why I bit the bullet, so to speak, and went with those 60-120s because that was the only thing that was in stock. Obviously I switched out the mag release here. That did require a little bit of dremeling. You can see right there some material was removed because that little winglet that is on there at the bottom was too wide for it. And I also had to, as you can see, maybe it's not as easy to tell on the top there, I had to dremel a little bit off of the mag release itself because it was making contact with the top portion of this cutout. So two pieces, top of the mag release itself and the bottom of the actual receiver needed to be dremeled for this to fit. I'm not really feeling the shiny, so I will probably swap this out for something like what I have on my URGI, like this, but also in gray. So I'll see about that whenever I decide to make another order. I'm in the US and a lot of this stuff's come from overseas, and the tariffs and shipping is absolutely brutal, so getting parts from overseas doesn't happen very often. Obviously you can't tell just by looking at it, but this is a 130% spring from Angry Gun. I like this better because it helps the bolt go forward a little more consistently. For those of you who watched the initial video, you would remember that there was this like little bit of weird play with the bolt. This 130% spring makes sure the bolt goes all the way forward and removes bolt bounce altogether. Now, in that initial video, I also mentioned a T8 roller. That's what this is. This obviously is a PTS mech buffer. I do still have the green cap somewhere. I'm not gonna look for it, but this T8 roller increases the diameter of this so that it fits better into my buffer, as well as obviously having these roller bits, which help to keep it not only centered, but make the travel of the buffer smoother, since there's a rolling point of friction there. More cosmetic changes. I don't know if I mentioned this, but as you can see, I put on the PTS quick QD mount on the back here. I don't use slings. For anyone who's watched enough of my videos, you'll probably notice that, but I do loan my guns out to friends occasionally, and some of them like slings, so I have QD points on all of my builds. Obviously, I changed out the stock. This is a Magpul SL. I found out that Magpul makes gray furniture, and since this is a gray build intended for my gray loadout, I'm going all gray, or as much as I can. So gray Magpul SL, gray Magpul K2, and I forgot what this, XTS I think is what it's called, a Magpul. This has Picatinny down here, so I couldn't just get an M-Lock one, but Magpul makes this pretty neat Picatinny hand stop here, so I ended up grabbing one of those. This bolt roller here is also a T8. This can be either bought separately or as a set with the bolt cap, or the cap that goes on the buffer itself. They're both by T8, and they both have the same triple roller thing going on there. And this is for the same reason. One, obviously it's got the rollers, so it enables it to cycle more smoothly. And again, because it has those rollers, it keeps it centered because it spaces it away from the buffer evenly in every direction. And it's also heavier than the other ones that I had, so just putting a little bit more weight on the bolt to increase the recoil feedback just a little bit more. So I'm going back to the PH Plus unit for my URGI. I didn't really care for the Max unit. It's decent, but the fact that it doesn't allow you to do micro adjustments because it has a clicky style wheel instead of something like this where you can do fine adjustments, means that depending on what BB weight I was using, I may have been over or under hopping at one setting, and if I went a little bit higher or a little bit lower to compensate, it would effectively reverse. So if I was over hopping and I went down, it would under hop, and if I was under hopping and I went up, it would over hop. I really don't like that. I don't like those clicky style hop units. I don't like them in AEGs. I don't like them in pistols. I don't like them in my gas blowbacks. So I prefer styles like this, which allow you to do fine tuning, which both my Archwick unit is and my PH Plus unit is. I was going to try a TTI as well, but it looks like that might also be a clicky style unit. So if anybody knows the answer to that, let me know, because if it's not, I'll definitely pick one up so I can use it. Now, the only thing that I noticed with this is that for some reason, the tolerances seem to be a little bit off. So whenever I adjusted the hop, if I went too far, the arm would stick in the position it was in. And I was able to fix that. As you can see here, where it's shiny instead of red, I dremeled off a little bit of material. It wasn't a lot. It was literally like half a millimeter, 0.1 millimeter, something like that. It was really, really small. You can see that even the difference between the thickness at the top where it's silver and at the bottom where it's painted, it's kind of hard to tell. It really wasn't that much material that was removed, but that fixed it. So now the hop arm can move up and down properly as I adjust the hop unit. I did also do the same to the hop arm itself. I did that before I figured out what the problem was. So this may not be necessary, but it corrected the issue that I was having. So my hop arm no longer gets stuck and I can adjust it up and down with no problems. So something to keep in mind with the PH Plus. I know they have made a newer version, but I don't own one, and the only real differences I can tell between the newer one and my version is that the newer one, you see how I scratched an arrow into mine? The new one comes etched with an arrow that says plus and minus, so you know which way to turn it to increase or decrease the hop. I don't know if they've corrected the tolerances on it, but if again, if anybody knows, feel free to let me know. Before I forget, I'm going to go into the buckings here. These are both Archwicks. I forgot specifically what the model is. I know they have one that's called like the Arrow and one that's called the Javelin. I do believe these are arrows. And the only difference between these two is that one is silicone and the other one is the standard rubber. But I'm running Archwick buckings in both of my MWS. I have tried these LACC greens. They're pretty nice. I had this one in my Ghetto Blaster for a little bit, the 4UAD. I was unable to test it at range outdoors, but I have, well, in the MWS, but I have used the the AEG version of this, and I have used this in a pistol, and I was severely underwhelmed by the performance, so I don't feel bad about pulling that out in favor of one of these Archwick, because I have used the silicone one in my URGI before, and it's freaking awesome. So I'm gonna stick with the Archwicks until I either find something better or find some reason not to use them. And a real quick correction, I said I was gonna put the PH Plus in the URGI. That is not right. The PH Plus is going into the Ghetto Blaster. So I'm getting ready to put the the Ghetto Blaster back together. It's pretty much completely done. Aside from what I've already mentioned before, you'll notice that I took off the Unity flip to center mount. That's because it was offset by a pretty significant bit to the left, and it made it kind of weird to look through the magnifier. So I went back to the flip to side mount that came with it, and I did have to do a little bit of modifying to get it to sit properly. When I say I had to make a modification, this is what I'm talking about. I had to drill a hole at the bottom and put a grub screw in there so that it would shim it up so that it would be centered. But again, it lines up properly now. So I guess that's just going to be how I end up having to use it, which I'm okay with. I would have preferred to flip to center just because I wouldn't have something hanging off the side of my rail, but that's neither here nor there. I'll deal with what I have. On the URGI, the only external change that I've made is that I swapped out my forward assist for this tan one by Revanchist. Doesn't do anything. It's literally just for looks, just trying to make it more black and tan how I want it to look. So here's the trigger box Archwick out of my URGI, and this is probably going to be what I would say is the biggest and most difficult change that I've done in here, is putting a flat trigger in here. And I'll get into why in a little bit, but before I open this up and start talking about why this was so difficult, I want to point out that white line on there. That white line, if you haven't seen my original video, was not there before. I put that on there when I was trying to diagnose the problem with it, because after I initially put this trigger in here, it was actually binary. And I'll share a picture of that, or a video of that, just so you can see what I'm talking about. But the gun became binary after I put this flat trigger inside, and I couldn't figure it out. And I tried a whole bunch of stuff, and I finally realized it was because this piece, the disconnector, I believe is what this is, wasn't engaging properly with the hammer. And it wasn't even like a huge difference, right? I'm gonna see if I can show it here on video. It's a little bit hard because I'm using my phone, so I'm holding the trigger box with one hand and filming with the other. But it wasn't a lot of play. It used to, let me see if I can get it, and it'll probably not even be noticeable. It used to sit something like that. So you can see right there that there is a little bit of space between where the white line is at and where this wall, I guess for lack of a better description, of the trigger box sits. Now, that line was made before I modified the trigger, and it used to sit more like that, more lined up with it. And that's why it's in the position that it's in, is because in the position it was in initially, I took a white marker and I put a line right there. So where that line is at is where the flat trigger sat before I modified it. So I put the line on there, and then I put the original trigger in and checked to see approximately where that line is at. And lo and behold, the line was a little bit forward, as it's seen right here, right now. So that told me what the correction was that I needed to do in order to correct the binary issue. And as you can see, it wasn't a lot. So if you have an Archwick trigger box and you're interested in putting in an aftermarket trigger, it's possible, but you have to be very, very careful, and you have to look out for this specific problem, because if you don't understand what you're doing, you will make it binary. And if you start modifying any of these other pieces, you may not be able to repair that. So as I go into this, keep in mind that every single modification that was made in this trigger box is all on this new trigger. All other pieces were left completely untouched. Only the trigger was modified. All right, I'm not going to show all the internals of the trigger box. If you're curious about that, go watch my original video on the URGI. It's 40 minutes, and it's a full breakdown of the URGI as it is before this mod. I go over every single thing that's in there, including the assembly and disassembly of the trigger box and all the parts in it. Right. So if you've seen that, I mentioned that this trigger looks pretty close to a real steel trigger. And because I don't like curved triggers, I went out and started looking at real steel triggers, which became very apparent that they're not the same. And this is actually a VFC trigger. And if you may have guessed, I modified it. So the VFC trigger comes with expanded winglets. I don't really know how to describe it, but there's more material here, about this much more on either side. But it's not fully round like this. It's like it's got a flat on the top, and then only like the bottom half is extended. Obviously, I had to Dremel that down to get the correct shape, and I do have some calipers, so I was able to measure out most of what I needed. So I got the VFC trigger, shaved off the material from both of these sides that I needed to, and then I bored out these holes here because the VFC had like 4.5, 4.2 millimeter holes where the trigger pin goes, and this Archwick has like a 5.5 millimeter hole or something like that. So I had to bore out. So again, remove the material from here, from both sides, and having calipers is going to make this a lot easier if this is something you're interested in doing. And then bore it out. Again, the calipers come in handy here too, so you know exactly what size to make it. And then on the back side here, I had to remove some material here. I did remove a little bit more than I needed, but I was eyeballing this. I don't have fancy machines or anything like that to measure everything as I go, so I eyeballed every single thing that I did to this trigger. And that's just to mimic that cut right there. You can see here there's a very, very, very small step on both sides of the trigger. That wasn't necessary to do. As you can see, I didn't do that on this one. So that wasn't necessary, but this curved cut here was. And again, if you do this, you don't need to go this deep, but even as deep as I went, it doesn't affect the performance of the trigger. It still works just fine. And I'll probably do a video just to show you like, hey, yeah, this trigger works. Just a real quick shooting video to show that. And then here I had to round this off because this was completely flat. So I had to round that off to copy this section here. And you can probably tell that this is angled just the slightest bit. That was a little bit more difficult for me to do because, again, I don't have fancy machines. So I did my best to try to angle it. It kind of worked on one side, not so much on the other side. As you can see, this side looks a lot more straight than the other side, but it doesn't seem to be affecting it. I'm really hoping this holds up. You can see there's a little bit of wear there where it's interacting with the hammer. So I really hope this holds up. well enough for long-term use. And if it doesn't, I do have a plan for getting it, for adding more material on here. Just tack a weld on there and then reshape it as necessary. But as of right now, it's working well. Now you can see there's this little stud on the bottom. I did that as well. I drilled a hole into this. And that was because that was before I knew what the problem was with the binary. I was trying to figure out what was going on. And initially I thought like the trigger was, when I pulled it, it was going too far down and it wasn't able to come back in time to catch the hammer. So I thought maybe if I find some way to short stroke the travel of the trigger when it's pulled, I can correct that issue. It didn't work. This isn't necessary. You don't need to put a stud on the bottom like this. I'm not going to take it out just because I did JB weld it in there with the JB weld putty stuff. But the benefit is, again, I have a shorter trigger pull. So I guess you can decide whether or not you do that. I will say this is very, very hard material. So removing everything that I had to remove on here was quite an ordeal. It was pretty freaking difficult. So be very careful and keep that in mind. Specifically drilling that hole in there was a disaster. It took me like 30 minutes and my drill battery died. And then the way that I corrected the issue with the disconnector was actually by taking off a little bit of material from there. You can see how it kind of dips down a little bit. It wasn't a lot. It was literally like a millimeter, something like that. It wasn't a lot of material that had to come off, but I did have to make a little bit of a channel here on this section so that this piece could move forward just a little bit more. And this line again was my reference line, if you would, so that I knew about where it had to sit. And once I did that, and this was and the disconnector was able to move just a little bit forward, completely fixed the issue. So if you have an Archwick and you want to put a different trigger in there, you can put VFC triggers in them. However, they require quite extensive modifications. I was about to start putting this together and then I realized that there was one more piece of information that kind of matters. This is the spring that came out of the original trigger. This is the spring that's going into it now. This VFC trigger, the channel for the spring is significantly wider. Well, I don't know about significantly, noticeably wider. Actually, I would say significantly wider than the channel for the stock trigger. So luckily for me, I don't know where this spring came from, but I had this pretty strong, tiny spring that was wider than the stock spring that happens to fit perfectly in the VFC trigger. So if you're going to do this, you're going to need a wider spring. Something to keep in mind. Alright, so I've got the URGI fully assembled. There are some BBs in this mag. I don't know how many, but this is again just to show that with the flat trigger and the modifications that are required to make it work. Again, this is a VFC spec trigger. So if you have an Archwick trigger box, any VFC compatible trigger you can put in an Archwick trigger box, as long as you do the modifications that I spoke about. And again, be very, very careful when you're doing this and only modify the trigger. Do not cut into any other pieces, just the trigger. You can replace the trigger. As far as I know, Archwick does not offer replacement parts for their trigger box. So again, just to show you that it works with the mods that I did and the flat trigger. Again, you can see the trigger right there. See how many BBs are in this thing. That's it. Empty. Still locks back. And it's all good to go. The full auto works as well. Might as well show that too. But I don't really care for full auto as much, so it's a little bit less important to me than it is to other people. There you go.